were talking about money right now, and he said none of that money stopped in his hands. Money is something that you don't clutch, right? If
Mm-hmm.
you're holding on to money and you're thinking about, I don't have enough, you
Mm-hmm.
won't have enough.
Mm-hmm.
The best way to receive is this way,
Yeah.
right? And the best way to give is with your hands open, not with a clenched fist. Because if God did the same thing to us, there would be no Savior.
Facts.
Jesus would be right where he's at, and we'd be damned wherever we're at. So,
Facts.
yeah.
Welcome to the Trailblazers Talk podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Ortega, and we are committed to creating content that inspires, that motivates, and moves you as an entrepreneur so you could blaze your own trail to success. And I'm here with a very special guest today. I mean, it's a new season in my life as an entrepreneur, as a father, and also as a kingdom creator. God is just lighting my purpose in a way where I've been searching for this for a long time. And I'm here with a friend. I'm here with somebody who I met at City Light Las Vegas. So shout out to City Light. And this man has inspired me from the day I met him to today. So this podcast, it's about to go down. So if you're a believer, if you're an entrepreneur, you wanna pray, you wanna pause this and just pray because there's gonna be so much wisdom and perspective poured into this podcast. So make sure you're taking notes, make sure your heart's ready to receive. And with that being said, I want to welcome CJ to the show.
Thank you so much, man. That's a heck of an introduction.
Hey,
But yeah,
isn't it?
shout out City Light for sure. For
Yeah.
sure, man. Definitely happy to be on the podcast. Talking about faith, business, things we love, things we do, things we live.
Yeah. And like we were talking about prior to this, these conversations, what makes me excited is because I'm always that person outside of the podcast, wanting to be poured into. And I'm just really excited to go into your faith, go into, you as an entrepreneur and your father as well, and just really dissect your why. Like, my biggest goal for 2024 is to make sure my foundation is set. And so I want to just ask you the question of like, what is your foundation?
So where my foundation started was from my parents. In the very beginning, I was told to be a leader and not a follower. And I thought that was extremely important. But I did realize growing up that the best leaders are the best followers, right? So over time, I knew that God had to be the source of my foundation. Anytime that I strayed away or I felt like things weren't going right in life, I had to look at where was God aligned in those situations. So God's my foundation. Integrity, doing things when no one's looking, right? Doing the right thing when no one's looking. I think that's extremely important. And then just my family. I think my family just kind of keeps me grounded. I have 2 younger children, my wife, who I've been with for almost 13 years now. So there's a lot
That's
of
beautiful.
yeah, I mean, being with someone for 13 years
Yeah.
is amazing. Been married to her for almost, 7 years now. So I think my foundation just comes from those principles that I learned growing up. And then just over time, understanding that I am a leader, but it's okay to be a follower of other great leaders.
I love that. I feel when you're a parent, your foundation it elevates, and there are a lot of parents listening in. I'm curious, what do you do to strengthen your foundation as a father first, and then everything you do after that?
Whew. So that's taken a lot of like therapy that I've gone to kind of understand like where we wear a lot of hats as dads,
Yeah.
from business
Yeah.
to husband to father to son of your parents, right? So I think the first thing that I do in order to make sure that my kids know that we have a good like solid foundation is I put the phone down and I go to the floor. I've learned this from my old sales manager a long time ago, that when you get home, even though you've been having a rough day, it's very easy to get on your phone and start scrolling. Get on the floor with your kids, impromptu dance parties, ice cream runs, being silly, playing dress up. Like those are things that are the minutia, but we have to remember that this is their childhood right now. We had our childhood. This
That's
is
good.
They didn't ask to be here, so they're here now, and we have to operate
Yeah.
like that.
That puts so much perspective, because as a kid, I remember like, when's my mom or when's my dad gonna play with me?
Mm-hmm.
And that's good, man. I really do. I need to practice that more because for me, I could
Mm-hmm.
come home and it's easy to just like, oh, I forgot this email or I forgot this, and you're just
Mm-hmm.
constantly grinding.
Mm-hmm.
So that do you make that like a non-negotiable right when you go home? Turn off your phone, or you just like shelve it?
Well, when I get home, the first thing is again through therapy and just over time,
Yeah.
it's you and your wife first. So
Mm,
before you go and hug your kids, before you go to the ground,
that's
you make sure you
good.
go kiss your wife and hug your
That's
wife
good.
because she's been at home
Yeah, yeah.
working
That's
with
good.
those kids, right?
That's good.
One thing that she taught me, and my wife, she's brilliant. I'm not just saying that; she's actually really brilliant.
Yeah.
She said that when a kid is asking you to play, that's a sign of stress for them, or that's a way for them to try to figure out what's wrong with you. So when you start hearing like play with me, you need to stop what you're doing and immediately go into dad fun play mode. So I've tried to make it a routine. There's been times where I've been called out by my wife, like, "Hey, work was when you came through the door. Let's get off the phone."
Yeah,
And I have
yeah.
to be off the phone.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a
Hmm.
good reminder for me, man.
Yeah.
That's that. And I'm sure everyone that's listening in, like, if you're a parent, pause this, take notes, put your phone down. Like you said, the first thing you do when you come into your home is you kiss your wife, hug your
Hmm.
wife, and then you go straight to your kids.
Yep.
Man, that's amazing.
Automatically. I think you have to do that because
Yeah,
they've been as a parent, and if you're not a parent right now, super important that
yeah.
when they hear you pull up, do not sit in the driveway. Go into the house. They're excited to see you. Pick
Man, you're
them
making
up,
people
grab
feel a
them.
certain type of way right now, sitting in the driveway.
Yeah. Parents, and especially dads, you have that decompression time. But
Yeah,
like when it's home, you got to turn it on. And even if it's for like 15, 20 minutes, I think it's important that you're present with your kids. Be at where your feet at, is what I
be
always
at
say.
where your feet at, man. That's a
Hmm.
bar, bro. You
Yeah.
gotta say that one more time for the people in the
You
back,
gotta
man.
be at where your feet at in all aspects of life, in your
Yeah,
marriage, with your kids, in business. You have to be present at all times. There's a time and a place to not be
yeah.
present, but
That's beautiful. Man, that's such a great reminder. And, going into that more with your faith,
hmm
I think we were talking prior to this and you're saying you're born a Christian. How has your faith evolved over time to now you're a father, you're an entrepreneur, you do like medical stuff in the medical space too. It's
hmm
like how do you this is just like a really a butchered question, but like, how does your faith, growing your faith, impact everything else that you're doing?
that's that's a good question. And if I have to go back to like the foundation of faith, I remember getting saved like in the second or third grade on stage at Word of Life Christian Center, where I think that's my foundation. So shout out to Word of Life Christian Center on Buffalo in Las Vegas. And then being in the youth, being brought up, and kingdom principles being taught by my mom and by my dad over time has made me understand that my faith gets stronger with every area of my life or whatever stage that I'm in. So, for example, like right now, I'm in this stage of being a father. Prior to that, it was being a husband. Prior
Mm,
to that, it was just being a single man trying to navigate the city of Las Vegas. And to be at the position that I'm in right now, I think it's important for everyone to understand that like your faith is you're never going to get to the end destination of faith.
mm,
Like that's going to be something that's constantly in front of you. You're going to constantly have to trust fall. Like be okay with falling down and knowing that God's going to be there to catch you. I think last night when we went to the revival night, that just really struck home for me that like he's always there whether it's up or it's down.
mm.
So I think faith overall, my faith has just grown, like, and it's a work in progress. Omar had said it on his story the other day that being a Christian can be easy, and I think it becomes easy the more that you rely on faith, and the more that you
Mm-hmm.
rely on faith, the more you can hear His word. Like if you want to hear God's voice, and I'm saying this to anyone who's listen to this right now, if you want to hear God's voice, get into the book, get into worship, get into spending time with God. We always talk about these people who get to hear God's voice, and we want to hear an audible voice. Most of the time, it's a whisper.
That's so good. One thing you just said, or Omar said was
Mm-hmm.
being a Christian is easy. I want to say being an entrepreneur without God is hard.
You say that.
Bruh. Like, yo,
Yeah.
being an entrepreneur without God is hard.
Mm-hmm.
Being a
Mm-hmm.
Christian and an entrepreneur, I'm not saying it ain't hard or God's a genie or God's gonna bankroll your whole business,
Mm-hmm.
but it's easier.
Correct. I think it's easier in a sense that when you know where your help comes from
Mm-hmm.
and you know that you don't have to rely on self,
Yeah.
because self is
Yeah.
also an idol. And most of the time, where the stress, the anxiety, the depression comes from is you thinking about how you have to do all this on your own.
Yeah.
Insert
Facts.
God into that equation, or
Yeah.
put God at the forefront. You never have to worry about food. The lilies don't have to worry about how they're being
Right.
dressed. The sparrows don't have to worry about what they're going to eat. Like, how much more does he
Right.
love you?
Right. Now that's so beautiful because, like, I know you're in sales too,
Yeah.
and I know that you built business and you're building stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So as an entrepreneur in these spaces, you pick up like personal development. I'm sure here, left and right books
Mm-hmm.
you've read. What really blows my mind is all this like personal development stuff. I feel, and I've heard other people say it, but it's inspired from the Bible.
Absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
growing up, like the Bible is always thrown at me from my parents. Like, oh, you read the Bible. If you don't
Mm-hmm.
read the Bible, you're gonna have a bad life.
Yeah.
It was just more of a fear tool.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always resented the Bible. I'm like, why
Mm-hmm.
do I want to learn from stories from people who aren't alive? They don't get it. Like I always looked at the Bible like, oh, it's just old people stuff. Like it
Mm-hmm.
just never was attractive to me until I looked at it from a perspective of like, okay, if I'm easy to go pick up a Think and Grow Rich book or
Mm-hmm.
personal development
Mm-hmm.
and be excited about it because I know it will help me in my business. What if I look at the Bible that way? What if I look at the Bible as a guide, as a man, as a father, as a leader to learn from? And when I made that shift, it changed everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying all that to ask you, like, when you read the Bible, what lens are you reading it from?
So it's funny that you brought up like in the past, like reading about like old stories and books. Like the Bible, for me growing up, wasn't something that I would go and jump to right away. I would find other avenues to be inspired, right? And the acronym for Bible, at least, is basic instructions before leaving Earth. And I think it's important to people to understand that we're going to leave Earth at some point, and all the tools are in the Bible. There's Job's. There's a story about a man where he lost everything, right? You've had the story of Noah. There's just so many different, how do I say it? There's so many different books in the Bible that give you principles for today. And the way that I look at my lens from the Bible is I don't start in Genesis. To me personally, I feel like it's a lot. I got to find out who's the son or who's the father of which I start. I start in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And as you're reading through that, understand who Jesus was first.
Mm.
And once you understand who he was first, that allows you to dig deeper into understanding why he did certain things. Then you start getting excited about reading the Bible and you start breaking like verses down like, okay, so Jesus was going to ride up on a donkey. Why was that so prevalent?
Mm.
Go back and like dig into that on Google. Also, like why was it so important for them to bow to Nebuchadnezzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Like why was that so important? So as you're reading through the Bible, you start to understand that the more you read, the more you hear.
Mm.
And the more you hear, the more you can do in life. So you can start, oh shoot, that was in the Bible. So for me, and long-winded answer, I read the Bible through the lens of I need to know who my Savior is. And then all of the previous stuff in the Old Testament, those are prophecies that are being fulfilled for who my Savior is today.
Wow. That gave me perspective to really dive in. You said you read the gospel, so Matthew, Mark,
Luke and John. Mm-hmm.
Is that a good place for, because there's a lot of people I'm connected with who's listening in
Mm-hmm.
and like, man, like I want to dive into the Bible. is that where you recommend everyone to dive into at first, or is that what worked best for you?
It worked best for me, and I think that's important because our faith is based off of Jesus, that he died and resurrected, by the stripes on his back, like we are healed. Like you can go and watch all the movies or you can read
Yeah.
all these different books, but until you know who's going to be coming back when
Yeah.
those trumpets, the second time, the first time when we're gone, but when he comes back and he's riding on that horse, you need to know who he is. And if you want to find purpose in your life, you're gonna have to open the Bible up. You're just going to. I think living life without God is the way Satan's intended for us to live.
Mm-hmm.
From the very beginning, he just came to steal, kill, and destroy. And I've learned over time that I mentioned this to my friend the other day. How can I really allow myself to be tempted as a Christian, right? This is another perspective. So when when Satan went and told a third of the angels that they were going to take over heaven and they got cast out of heaven, those angels became demons, right? So who am I? Like, you have to be dumb enough to think that you can take over the kingdom of God. And now you're a demon trying to tempt me. I have to remember that I know where your future is. Your future is in the lake of fire. I know where my future is. You already know you're trying to drag me down. So you have to, as a non-believer, if you get into the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it's a great foundation. It gives you the story of Jesus, and it also gives you miracles that he's performed. If you're like me, I like to be in Revelation. I like to know what's going on right now, prophecies that are being fulfilled. But I think overall, if you're a Christian or if you're a non-believer, starting in those Gospels really help you understand different perspectives during that time.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And I just want to take a moment. Everyone that's just been listening in, make sure you just write down those books. I've started to dive into the Bible lately, and I haven't even started there. So that's a great reminder for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I trust you, man. Like last night, they were saying like when you see a man of God, like I know that you're a man of God. And I know that this conversation is going to bring people closer to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just really grateful that we're touching on this early on in this podcast, because I feel like that's the most important. If you could get any gem out of today, that's the gem. That's the bar.
Yeah.
One of the bridges I want to just make into the next part of this conversation is from a business perspective, how has kingdom principles impacted your income, your business ventures, networking? I mean, all that stuff.
It's a testimony, man. Like, I've always said, like, when things were going good in my life, it wasn't me. Like, I'm just a man. It's definitely been God's hand on my life. And I think over time, I realized that a lot of my prosperity and the things that I have come from me tithing. It's been a principle that I've learned from since I was maybe 5, 6 years old. Giving 10% of my income, that's the basic. And that's the only time in the Bible that God says, test me. The only reason that he says that, and he said this last night, but I dove into it last night before I went to sleep. God gave his only son. So he already knows how giving works. So he's telling you that if you can test me in this area, see if I don't pour out enough blessings that there's not room enough to receive. I don't know about you, but I would love to have a lot of blessings where I don't have enough room to store them. And Tommy last night, Tommy Barnett, right? That was his name. That was my first time ever hearing about him. And he said he had millions and millions of dollars go through his hands and not stay there. And that kind of hit me because as a Christian, you have to, especially in business, there's a lot of people who make, $1 million, 500 grand, 600 grand, but it doesn't land on good ground, right? That money isn't your money in the very beginning. You have to give it back to God. So there's been times where, like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to tithe, right? In my head, I'm thinking of like, oh, I gotta pay Visa, or I gotta pay MasterCard, or I have to pay this bill. But if I just put God at the forefront, this is where faith becomes involved. He's gonna take care of you if you put his house first. And when you're giving, don't be reluctant to give, because he'd rather you be a cheerful giver than not give it all.
Mm.
So you can sometimes it's best to pray before you give. It's best to, especially in business, pray over your business and know that the money that's coming in is going to go back to fulfill kingdom purpose.
Man, I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So what drives you to continue to go after large amounts of money and go
Mm-hmm.
after business? You know, what's your drive?
So when I first started, and we had talked about this prior to the podcast starting, my goal by the time I was 25 was to make $100,000. I remember as a kid that I was going to be driving up to some corporate office. I was going to have nice clothes on. I was going into a corporate building, and I was making six figures. I worked at timeshare for probably about 8.5 years prior to what I do now. And they always talked about, you can make whatever you put out there. It's the first time I ever heard it. So I was 24 years old. I got my first $10,000 check 4 months into it. Called my mom up. Hey, Mom, I made my first $10,000. Called my dad up. Hey, I made my first $10,000. And both
You're
of them
excited,
gave me,
huh?
yeah, they gave me different answers,
Yeah.
but both answers out of love, that it either wasn't gonna always be like this, or hey, this is the first of many, or save your money.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, I've been a person that's just burned through money, like just growing up. So anyway, I hung up the phone from both of them, and I recognized that I had to stop trying to impress my parents with the accolades and the things that I'm getting, and start doing it for myself. At the same point in time, I'm with my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, and I told myself that I was gonna make $100,000. So the following year, I made $100,000 in 10 months, and I had about a nervous breakdown.
A nervous
A
breakdown.
nervous breakdown. We were on the way to Mexico with a bunch of timeshare friends to go celebrate, going to one of our properties. And I was talking to one of my guys. We were sitting in the back of the Benz. I remember it. And I was like, dude, I made $100,000. I feel like my kind of life's over, man. Like, this was my goal. The entire, like, I don't know. I don't have any purpose. And he was like, just change your goal. I was like, come again? So change your goal. Whatever number you put out there is what you're gonna hit. So if you aim for the stars, you might hit a couple of clouds. You aim for the moon, you're definitely gonna hit a couple of stars. You aim for the universe, you're gonna hit some planets. So from that day forward, my perspective changed. And I was 25 at that time. I said I wanted to make $125,000 that year. I only made 125. So then it became a game to me. But I couldn't just put a number out there. And this is important for anyone. If you're gonna put out a number of X amount of dollars you're going to make, you need to tap into what senses you're going to see. Like, hey, when I make $500,000 this year, this is going to provide the funds for X, Y, and Z.
That's so
when
good.
I get those funds, it's going to make me feel this way. I'm going to be able to do X, Y, and Z for this charitable organization or do something for my kids. But I've made more and more money each year. And I think what's pushed me now with having children is how much of that can I actually keep. Legacy. I have a personal goal. I was telling you about this earlier, to make $10,000 a week. That's $520,000. The only reason I want to make that amount is because I have a personal goal of giving $100,000. The only way I'm going to do that is giving 30% of my income. So God is going to give seed to the sower. So in order for me to get more seed,
Yo, that's a bar. Hold on, bro. Drop the bar, man. These people in the back need to hear it.
God will only give seed to the sower. So if I want to make $520,000 because I have purpose behind that 520, I want to be able to give $100,000 to my church. The only way I'm able to give $100,000 to my church is I'm earning more income potential, and that's giving 30% of my income. And I'm not saying that to brag or to boast, but Dave Ramsey said if you want to live like no one else, you have to give like no one else. And I've seen some amazing things happen for my mom, for my dad, for my sister, from just people of faith who have given and trusted God, and God has just poured like blessings on them that there literally is no room to receive it.
I love that. And as people are digesting this, I told you earlier a phrase I'm coining, and I'm sure I didn't create this, but it's a phrase I'm living by. You know, a lot of entrepreneurs, you and I, for a long time, we want to focus on return on investment. And like I've been saved my entire life, but I committed to Christ a year ago, and like that commitment's brewing up to a larger commitment, and like going into 2024. yeah, business is about return on investment, but when you're kingdom driven, now it's about return on impact.
Yeah.
And I just want to challenge everyone. You don't need to go 30% like CJ. I mean, that's his own commitment, but put a goal out above 10%. As an entrepreneur, what are you doing to build the kingdom? And a simple shift of 10 to 15 to 20 will have a higher return on impact. Mm-hmm. And I could say this, when you give, like what he said, God gives seed to the sowers, that we said, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When you give, your business will multiply and the supernatural will come in. I took notes last night from Tommy. I just want to pull it up real quick because I think it's really important.
Yeah, when you say, as you're pulling that up,
yeah,
like just being able to put that into your business, like to know that if God's hands on your business versus God's hand not being on your business, what's the result? What's going to be the impact?
Bro, it's negative impact because I've experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
I've made, I don't want to say the number, but I made a lot of money
mm-hmm.
and I lost it, man. Time after time. I would buy the car, get the house, travel overseas, do what I want to do. And then there's always, I hit a ceiling and
mm-hmm.
I drop to the floor.
Yeah.
I found the note last night and it says, your needs can attract the supernatural power of God.
Bar.
That was a bar from Tommy Burnett last night, bro. When he said that, my whole body lit.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to like talk about this because like, you know, most people go into business or sales because they want money, they want to have a certain lifestyle, they want the car, you know. And when you get that, you're like, what's next? Like,
I don't know.
You feel worse than without having it because
Correct.
you feel worse because you're like, what now?
Right. And the what now comes from you. Those are material things are going to come and they're going to go. They're always going to be there. But we're in this series at City Light right now called Legacy. And legacy is what's, to me, I think it's what's passed down when you're not here, right? Mm-hmm. That's why I think YouTube and podcasts are so important because when you're not here, the kids are able to still hear your voice.
Facts.
And I think when you're talking about legacy, there are other things outside of yourself. I work in the medical device what do you call it? I work in the hospitals, long story short, and I sell medical devices. Go into the ER, go into the ICU, go into the cath lab, and talk to people that are on their deathbed and ask them, hey, what was the best car you had? All they're going to say is, I wish I had more time. Right? So what are you doing with your time? It's good. I'm not saying having those things aren't important. But what I'm saying is, what impact are you leaving on Las Vegas or whatever city that you're living in? I'm pretty sure there's homeless people. I'm pretty sure there's shelters. I'm pretty sure there's orphans. There's a lot of things that your money can go towards. Obviously, kingdom purpose is great because at our church, we have missions. We have a lot of things that they're doing outside of our building. I'm just saying that if God's hands on it and if God sees you going and giving of yourself to other people, he's going to bless that.
100%.
But you can't do that other stuff without giving to his kingdom first. Don't think that's a replacement. If, oh, no, I give to charity, or no, I give to God's house first before you do anything.
That's a bar.
It'll change your life.
That's a bar. And also being intentional.
Mm-hmm.
I feel, I'm not saying go cold turkey and change your business and stop doing what you're doing. But if your business, if your formula to get your net profit in your business squeezes in 15% back to the church or your church,
it's gonna make a way.
It's good. Your business is gonna be crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, last night when Pastor Tommy was speaking about how there's times where he doesn't even know how his dream centers are going to get funded. Man. God makes a way. And I'll tell you this, I'm gonna speak to every entrepreneur right now. Let's be real. There's times where you don't know how you're going to pay your bills. And you get in this stress mode and you curl up in a ball and you lose your mind, or you go to your vices, or you do some just dumb stuff because you're too overwhelmed. There's too many times, especially as men and as leaders, where we fall on our back because we can't pay our bill, and we built this business and we invested a whole bunch of money and all this stuff, and then we lose it, or we have to pivot. But I'll tell you this, when God's in that equation, I'm not saying, you ain't going to be in that position. I mean, you possibly will.
That's where
but
faith comes in.
That's where faith comes in.
Mm-hmm.
But the supernatural power of God, he always makes a way.
Don't get me running in here.
Always makes a way, bruh.
Yeah, I think what you said is super important. Like with Pastor Tommy talking about finding a need and fulfilling it. He's going to supply all your needs through his riches, not your riches, right? We have we're heirs of a king. And if you want that inheritance, you have to be around. So the closer you are to God, the more you're not stressed about, hey, I don't know where that next bill, I don't know how that bill is going to get paid. Sometimes I remember I would give tithes and say, all right, God, it's really that's not, I didn't have it in my budget because I was not giving for a while, and then I started giving. And obviously you spend more when you're not giving.
Yeah.
So now you start giving and you realize that, hey, I could maybe cut back on a couple of things, right? But God always makes a way, whether someone drops off some money, whether, someone buys something in the studio, whether there's sales that just come from me in work. Like there's just big deals that go down, and it's not me. It's about those daily deposits that I did prior to.
That's a bar
that
right
gets
there.
Me there.
That's a bar.
Yeah.
I love that. And that's actually a good segue into daily deposits as an entrepreneur. A lot of people think that massive success in business comes in this big moment, but what they don't realize, it's the books you read or the proximity to certain people. So I'm just curious, man, because you said something when we're just, talking prior to this podcast, that you're always picking up from different people. Like, how can I learn something from this person or that person? Like, what's your mechanism or just your mindset when it comes to being a sponge?
Man, I've been a sponge ever since selling timeshare for the 8 years I did. I always said that you are no different, no better than I am. You just got more time. So if you have more time, the best people leave those jewels. It's your job to go and find where those jewels are. So I would go on YouTube. I used to listen to Grant Cardone. He would talk about the 10X rule. And I look at principles. Sometimes you don't look at the person, you look at the principles that you can pull from them. I listen to Andy Elliott. He cusses like a sailor. But there's principles that he talks about that I'm sitting there writing notes. Sometimes it's good to just, if you're listening to this and you're like, hey, how can I digest this fully? Listen to something the first time and don't take any notes. Then listen to it on 1.5 speed and write stuff down.
Bro, I thought I was the only one that did that.
Bro, it changed my life when I found out that.
Yeah, bro, that's a hack, bro. Yeah.
I can listen to podcasts
because your subconscious mind already picked it up, and then when you're taking notes, it just hits you differently.
And then after you've taken notes that time, then it's time to look at, okay, what are 2 things that I can do this week from this podcast?
Yeah.
I mean, we go to a church with a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
I've never been in a position to where there's people that are salespeople. There are people that run entire multi-million-dollar companies. There's people who do media. There's just so many different avenues of success, but the principles of success are always the same.
That's a fact.
Every time.
That's a fact.
And one of the books that I read, and Richest Man of Babylon.
I still haven't. I got to read that book.
That's such a good book. It again
ties
back to the Bible,
yeah.
Kingdom Principles. But I was watching a podcast yesterday, and that book was dropped. That name was dropped. Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. There's just a lot of different books and people that you can always pull something from, but you have to go and seek it out. It goes back to what you were saying about as being intentional. I feel like I'm intentional with my success and my growth. And people always, I want to be where you're at. Like if you ever see someone that's playing a piano amazingly, and you're like, I wish I could play piano like that. Of course, you want the finished product, but do you want to do you want the work where no one was watching to get to that end result? So I think that you may look at somebody that's super successful and you want to be in their shoes. Know that they went through some blood, some sweat, some tears, lots of tears, especially as an entrepreneur, that you're crying and you're alone. But you throw God into that equation, ask him to reveal things to you as you start. Like we get on our knees and we talk about like you have to have these like super big prayers. It's okay to just talk to God and say, "Hey God, before I watch this podcast, I just want your hand on me and let the Holy Spirit reveal to me what needs to be revealed." You will be you'll be blown away on how many things you will get accomplished just by asking the Holy Spirit and God to be involved.
Man, that's a bar. I was telling Kyle that you met earlier. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
man, we gotta. One of the things that I'm implementing starting today is just praying when we walk into this building, because, like what you said, you never know what the Holy Spirit could reveal to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like prayer is so essential, and it's really easy to go days and weeks without it
Dude.
when you're not intentional. My biggest breakthrough is just as an entrepreneur, generally speaking,
Mm-hmm.
is being intentional with how much money you want to make, being intentional with who you want to connect with.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're intentional, it's hard at first, but it becomes natural. Like, it's hard to be intentional about how much money you want to make when you haven't earned a substantial amount. But once you earn it, it's like, oh, this is that. It's easy.
Mm-hmm.
You just got to be more intentional.
Yeah.
And the same thing with prayer. And I want to ask you this question from a perspective of a married man,
Mm-hmm.
from a perspective of a leader, from a perspective of an entrepreneur, just from a perspective of everything you are.
Mm-hmm.
How powerful has prayer been to just your life, generally speaking, with all these hats that you wear?
I mean, prayer saved my life from, if we're getting like deep, deep, deep.
Yeah, let's go all the way down, bro.
You know, I've been going to therapy for the last like year and a half right now, almost 2 years, and I feel like it's okay to have prayer and therapy, just because God is your source. There could be other stuff that you need to work on individually, right?
Yeah.
So, prayer in my life has it's saved me from doing things that maybe that could have been final that I chose not to move forward with. Um, it's been times where I prayed for the woman that I have today, my wife. I prayed to God. I remember I was 20 years old, and I said, God, the next woman that I get with, I promise I'm going to marry. I want her to look
Wow.
like this. I want that. I spelled it. I made my order to God, right? And He gave me everything that I wanted.
That's beautiful, man.
But it's great to pray for something and then get it and forget what you prayed for and forget God provided that for you. So I think in my life, you have to pray for the expectation that you're going to get it, praise that you already got it, act like you already got it, and then don't forget to thank Him. I think prayer most of the time, if you're an entrepreneur or you're a non-believer, you've probably heard of prayer being your request to God. And if you've ever been in a situation where someone's coming to you with requests, you're not reluctant to give it as often. So with God, you have to thank Him first, right? For His mercy, for Him giving air in your lungs, for Him providing a roof over your head, food in your belly. Thank Him for what He's already did for you. And then throw a prayer out. Hey God, He knows everything that you need. He already knows.
That's a bar.
So you have to understand that prayer does not happen without you being intentional, without you expecting that you're going to get it. That's where faith comes in, because you don't have it yet when you're praying most of the time.
Facts.
You don't have the family that's together. You don't have that daughter that ran away. You don't have that dream job or that dream house, or you're single, but you're not alone. God's with you throughout that entire experience, but you have to be intentional with your prayer.
Man, that's a bar. And I just want to take a moment for everyone listening in. I know this podcast, we went in like a few different areas, and the foundation is faith. Just take a moment and look at your notes, or take a moment and just like dissect what you learned so far, because I just really believe what we're about to get into next is going to be super, super dope. So get ready. Make sure if your notes is already down on the bottom, flip the page. Flip the page, man. Get a new notebook.
Yep.
Yo, so I'm really like enjoying this. What I want to talk about next is money. Is a
don't say how much money you
right?
make.
Or don't say how much money you're gonna make, or it's just like it's like forbidden. But the truth is, money is a resource, and what you were saying earlier, you wanna tie the $100,000. You know, I feel the conversation of money needs to be more common amongst leaders and amongst entrepreneurs and amongst people of faith. So I want to just you kind of said it earlier. You want to earn 500 and X amount of thousands of dollars to then tithe. How are you actually going to do that? And is it from you do like high ticket stuff in medical? Is it in that? Is it within your custom? And by the way, if you guys see them, look at this camera. I don't know if this camera shows it, but this cause toy thing, what is it called? Cause figure. Yeah. I actually made this myself at his studio. So if you're in Vegas, I'll tell you this. I went there one time and I brought my family the next day because it's such a great experience if you have kids or if you're single with friends or if you want to impress a date. Like, his spot is legit. So it's going to be on the show notes below. If you're listening on iTunes or whatever, go to YouTube channel. Should be on the show notes there. But definitely shout out to Vibes DIY Studio because, man, y'all are holding it down as I think one of the only places in Vegas to do something like this.
Yeah, we're the only ones. Rug tufting studio, so you can send
rug tufting too. That's you
can send us an image of whatever logo you want, and we'll trace it for you. You can do as small as a cup holder or as big as like an area size rug.
Yeah, that's hard.
And then we have different figures from Ka inspired figures, Bear Brick inspired figures. We have cement, Jordans. We have cement,
candles too. Yeah, that's hard, man.
We have a little bit of everything for everyone, and that's gonna help me accomplish my goal. Vibes DIY Studio is one because we found a need. He talked about it. Pastor Tommy talked about it yesterday. Find a need and fill it.
Yeah.
There's not a rug tufting studio here in Las Vegas. There's not a place where you can go and paint car-inspired figures. So we found a need, and we put it on a side of town where most of the time people have to come to the Strip and do that. So now we're pulling people into our community, which is helping other businesses thrive and whatnot. But going back to your question, like, $100,000 was a big number to me when I was 24, when I was 23, right? $1 million is a big number. I've never made that amount of money before, but what I've learned over time is you have to break it down to the ridiculous. So prior to me going to church last night, I sat down and I wrote out what the next 5 years were going to look like. And I wrote out how many working days were in those months. So I'm breaking it down to the ridiculous. If you don't take anything from what I'm about to tell you, break down your year into the ridiculous. There's 21 days in 1 month, 22, 23. That's the first thing. Break it down by 90-day increments. Okay, in order for me to make $520,000, I got to make $130,000 every 3 months. How am I going to do that? I got to sell X amount. I got to start my clothing line, which we'll talk about at some point. And Vibes DIY Studio, but I have purpose behind it. There's a reason why I'm trying to go after that. If you don't have purpose behind the amount of money that you're gonna make, you're never gonna make it.
Man, say that one more, bro. There's people on the back, man. Like they're
the person who just came to sit down. Right. If you don't have purpose behind the amount of money you're gonna make, you're never gonna make it.
Man, that's a bar.
Yeah,
that's so good. That's so good because Pastor Tommy he said he had 50 people donate $1 million. So that's 50 million from those 50 people, not considering everyone else. I'm assume he had hundreds of millions of dollars ran through his hands. And for the most part, most of that money went back into the kingdom. And that's crazy to just comprehend.
Yeah. It really
that's
is.
Crazy. And that's 1,000% purpose.
Yeah, he's purpose living driven. Like that's purpose living driven. You put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
That's for real. Going back to clothing, right? I've always been very intentional about the clothes that I wear and what I represent. I've always done my research on certain things as far as is this person of Christ? If they're not of Christ, everyone talks about wearing fear of God. That's great, but that's not a Christian brand. The more you dig into stuff, the more you find out It's not that, but it is. So we're talking about Pastor Tommy and him being purpose driven and him having the dream center. One of the shirts that I wanted to make talks about the crowns that we get at the, it's cool to get saved and get into the kingdom of God, but when we get into the kingdom of God, there's still tasks and there's still things that need to be done. There are certain crowns that you get. There's a crown of service. I wish I had all the different crowns that I could talk about right now, but there's so many different crowns, and I feel like Pastor Tommy, his crown's gonna be crazy.
Yeah.
His crowns are gonna go insane. So I just think when we're talking about money right now, and he said none of that money stopped in his hands. Money is something that you don't clutch, right? If you're holding on to money and you're thinking about, I don't have enough, you won't have enough. The best way to receive is this way, right? And the best way to give is with your hands open, not with a clenched fist. Because if God did the same thing to us, there would be no Savior.
Facts.
Jesus would be right where he's at, and we'd be damned right where we're at. So,
Facts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to rephrase what you said. If you don't have intention or purpose behind money, you'll never get to the amount of money you want to get to. It's a fact. I mean, let's just think about it. Let's just put it into terms non-believers or people who are barely coming to Christ can understand. If you wanted that car, you're going to find a way to get it.
Yeah.
Right? Hey, if you need to come up with X amount of money and it's very purposeful, let's just say like, yo, you about to get evicted and you got to come up with 2 bands, you're going to find a way to get it because there's so much fire under your butt.
Right.
But instead of coming from a place of scarcity or place of lack, come from a place of purpose. Like, yo, if you make $1 million, you could give 10% to your church. You could give 10% to ministry. Like, that's that fire that fuels it. I mean, that's where I'm coming from because I've always been a person who was led by everything else. Like, I always were like, I'm impacted. I want to impact. But the truth was, I want to impact myself. At least that's what I wanted. And that always put me down a hole of hitting rock bottom every time. I mean, I could have the world in the hand and then lose it.
Right. And it's, I don't want to cut you off, but it's like exalting. It's something that I've dealt with for a long time, because when success comes, it's very easy to forget about God.
100%.
Christian or not, if you don't have those principles and you're not consistent and you're not praying and you're not in your word, it's very easy to exalt yourself, and that is not of God. That is of the devil to exalt 100%. Yourself. So you have to remember where your help comes from, and when you start getting the money, you got to have we were just talking about it on a board. You have systems in place.
Facts.
So where it's already built into your budget. And I'm not saying like I want to give $100,000 to brag, but that's been a goal as a kid of mine. Like as a child, I've wanted to give that amount of money. Once I started realizing what money can actually do and what I've seen it done to impact the faith.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
You
know, one thing I said earlier, I'm going to say it again, return on impact. Many entrepreneurs, even if they're not saved, everyone, has hard times that they grew up and, lack of whatever. And then they get into business. They see they can make a difference in their life. They see they can make a difference in their parents' life or people around them. So like, man, I want to make an impact. Then they go, I want to conquer the world. I truly believe that if you shift your perspective and you shift it into the kingdom, your impact will be 1,000,000 times greater. Because when God is the foundation, man, of your business, bro, I'm gonna get emotional here because it's like I went 15 years without God. And the last year I had God in it. And when I was homeless last year, I was like, talking to my fiance at the time, but wife now, it might take me 5 years to get back what we lost. And that was a tough conversation to have.
Yeah.
And not only have we gained what we had, but we're in a way better position today than I was before losing everything last year. And that's the power, that's the supernatural power of God. So I want to encourage everyone listening, look, I don't care if you're Muslim or if you're Buddhist or if you're whatever. Like, if you're going to go to a seminar to learn something new, if you're going to give, some guru a chance to impact you, give God a chance. Just give him a chance. Give the Bible a chance. Look, if you don't have a local church, give City Light a chance. Like, go on YouTube, bro. Like, just if you're gonna listen to a Lewis House podcast or Joe Rogan podcast, you can listen to Pastor Jabin Chavez.
1.5 times speed. Like,
yeah,
you don't gotta, and that's the thing too. Like, what you're saying is, you've tried it other ways.
100%.
You've tried the crystals. You've tried alcohol.
Sorry.
You've tried weed, right? You've tried mushrooms. Have you tried, like, I remember, and I'm gonna be like super transparent, when I was smoking weed prior to like falling away from God, right? Because I've been a Christian my entire life, so there's times where I would fall into not going to church, right? Just stop those daily habits. And I remember talking to my wife one day, and this is when she got pregnant. And I said, when you're smoking weed or you're doing any of these things, what are you trying to run from? I just want to, I just kind of want to mellow out. You can mellow out in faith. You can mellow out in the Bible. You can mellow out with God. Praise and worship is probably the best high you'll ever get.
Facts.
Right. But I say all that to say that you have to, your vice can be God. Your vice can be God, right? That is your source. That's your supplier. He puts breath in your lungs, not all these other gurus or like substances. Facts. So when he's saying give God a chance, like, or give City Light a chance, give your local church a chance. Let God be involved in your life, and then look at the outcome of that as opposed to what you were saying 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Facts. And I think this is just really powerful just to take a moment to reflect. Because at the end of the day, we're all listening to this podcast to be better, to do better, to get better, to make more money, to do whatever. But again, the foundation, I was saying this earlier, I've built success with the foundation of I want cars, I want clothes, I want this, I want that.
Natural.
And bro, that foundation breaks every time. It ain't a strong foundation. Like, for all my real estate people out there, you ain't going to build a foundation without the right, or you're not going to build a house without the foundation. It's not, bro, you can get sued, bro.
Right.
You can build a multi-million-dollar home, and that thing's going to crash down the moment people live in there. But that's how life is. Your life will crash without the foundation.
Right.
We could study all religions. I think Pastor Dan.
I know who you're talking about.
Leanne or something. He was talking about that a few sermons ago, and look, we keep bringing up City Light because that's a church we go to. And, bro,
that's home team. So.
It's gonna be on this podcast, man, because I get a lot of my inspiration from these sermons. But I just want to say that from a money perspective, without God, like, God is abundance. God created business and entrepreneurship to build His will on earth. His will from heaven down on earth. I truly believe that. I truly believe that's entrepreneurs is just, we're doers of the gospel. That's I really do believe that. And I do believe every entrepreneur listening at this moment of the podcast, I believe that if you weren't saved, you're willing to at least give God a chance.
One time.
By this moment of this podcast.
And His hand's always been on your life. You have to remember that. Like, God's been with you at your lowest points. He's been with you at your highest points. He formed you in your mother's womb. He loves you so much that He knows how many hairs you have on your head. So if you're listening to this podcast and you feel like God's left you or God's never been involved in your life, there's a reason why you got drawn to this podcast.
100%.
He speaks through many people. And I think God's hand has been on my life for a very long time through me falling away. I mean, that's how I found City Light. Craziest story. We're got kids. It's during the pandemic. I tell my wife, hey, at the top of the year, we're going to start watching church. So we start watching Transformation Church with Pastor Mike and Charles Metcalf. great. The first person I saw was Charles Metcalf. He's preaching. I'm thinking he's the pastor of the church. So anyway, we keep watching. We keep watching. 1 week comes by and Jabin's preaching at Transformation Church. And
That's
I'm like,
crazy.
I've heard of City Light before. So then I pulled up to the old building and saw friends that I knew that were going to City Light.
Wow.
And that got me back wrapped in. So that just lets you know that God is constantly tugging at your heart.
Yeah.
He's constantly pulling. He's never going to leave you or forsake you, but you do have to seek the kingdom first. You have to put him first in your life, and everything will be added unto you.
That's a fact. Man, I'm full, man. Like I'm really grateful for this conversation. This was such a blessed way to start the week. Such a great way to come after yesterday's service to today. I'm so just grateful, man. A lot of people are like, man, this CJ Cat is so dope. What makes you even, in my opinion, very like iconic is everything that you do from a observation of someone who's getting to know you. You do things super well. Like your studio was much greater than my not to say I'm like, oh, my expectation was low. My expectation was high coming into your studio, and experiencing it was blown. Talking about your clothing brand, His Garments, which we'll talk about in a second, you know, the expectation of like, okay, like it's gonna be dope, and then seeing it, it was beyond.
Yeah.
You know, hearing that you do high ticket sales, then seeing what you're doing, then seeing you on the homie
Mike Barron.
Yeah, Mike Barron's page. I'm like, okay, dope. Like I knew he was here, but man, so I really feel that you're somebody who always strives to get to that next level.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious, like, what's your vision for His Garments, and like how do you see yourself rolling it out?
So
this was the most exciting part I was waiting for, by the way. I'm a clothing guy, so I'm excited about this.
Yeah, look at his jacket. His jacket's fire. I've always been like into fashion. I've loved all the brands. Everyone would always ask me, like prior to my name change from CJ Stay Blessed, it was CJ Stay Fitted. Like that's just, I've always loved clothes. I've always been into it. And there was times where I was trying to come up with a clothing line, but it wasn't God driven. I had like Twice as Hard clothing line where I was like, you got to work twice as hard for half as much, but like that could only go so far. So what got me into the Bible, circling back, what you were talking about, is I realized that, you know, some of these Christian brands, and nothing against them, but if you want people to wear your stuff, you got to be also sharing the gospel while they're wearing it.
Facts.
So what I did with what His Garments vision is to make the Bible come to life. So there's going to be literally collections after collections. I have a collection about Noah's Ark. I have a collection about, you know, Satan falling from heaven. I have a collection about the woman. The foundation of His Garments is this woman bled for 12 years. And she was unclean. Doctors had taken all her money. She was just cast out. And she heard about this Jesus dude, going back to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Heard about this Jesus dude that was going to be coming in, and heard that he can heal. So Jesus is on his way to go heal someone else's daughter who's 12 years old, right? This woman's been bleeding for 12 years. This daughter's 12 years old. And this lady pushes through the crowd. There's a crowd of people around Jesus. She pushes through the crowd and touches Jesus' garment and instantly stops bleeding. And Jesus stops and says, "Who touched me?" And one of his disciples looks to him and says, "We're all around you." He's like, "No, somebody touched me. I felt the power go out of me." So that got me thinking that I can heal people or bring people to Christ through clothing.
100% you can.
So His Garments is going to be high end. My first high end luxury shirt was an off-white shirt. I love Virgil. I love what he stood for. I love Pharrell. There's a lot of different people. Jerry Lorenzo. Like, it's inspired, but the way that I'm gonna roll it out, there's not a Christian brand in Vegas that I think is gonna do it the way that it's gonna reach people. Everyone, and I'm not taking away from any other brand, but like, I want athletes. I want politicians. I want the kid who would normally go and grab a Hellstar shirt to grab His Garments.
Facts.
Right? So everything that I am doing and showing is inspired from artists from the 16th century.
That's
People
dope.
that were after Christ died. Like you're going to see the artwork that I don't think you've seen anywhere else.
Yeah, yeah.
And eventually get it for kids, like kids his garments. But I think the biggest thing is like God's hand is all over that. And in order for me to build more collections, I got to dive deeper into the Bible.
Man, and that's gonna be another podcast once it's launched, and we
Yeah.
talk about the rollout and
Mm-hmm.
all that stuff. And like I said, man, I'm a clothing person, and one of the things I always tell people is clothing is just as influential as anything else.
Yeah.
Music, everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited about you, man. I'm excited to hear you're doing exceptional in the industries you're in, and
Mm-hmm.
just seeing God work through you is inspirational.
Thank
And
you,
man, like I'm grateful that this conversation was had on this podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm sure everyone that's connected now with you is very grateful too.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to ask, man, I always ask this leaving the podcast. It's something I always ask.
Mm-hmm.
If your existence were to be completely wiped, I'm talking no trace of you, no social media, nothing, except for a little piece of paper you're able to write one note on, and it's framed in the Hall of Heroes or some big museum for the rest of eternity, what would you write on that piece of paper?
You have what you say.
Yo, that is a bar.
We talked about foundations and me growing up. My mom would always say that to me. You have what you say. And for all these gurus, for what it says in the Bible, that is a kingdom principle. You have what you say. If you have abundance, if you say you have abundance, you got it. You say you don't have enough, you won't have enough. You say you have success. Now, faith without works is dead. Make no mistake. But if I'm going to leave something behind, you have what you say. And I hope a kid or somebody would pick that up and realize that there's power in the tongue. There's power in the tongue. There's death and life in the tongue.
That's a bar.
You choose whatever is coming out of it.
Man, that is how you end a podcast, bro. That is, man, I'm really grateful for you, man. Everyone that's been just tuned in here, I just want to encourage you guys, stay connected with CJ. This is one of thousands of podcasts he's going to be on. He's stepping into a whole different space. God is calling him to do big things. So make sure that you follow him. You're connected with him. If you're ever in Vegas, go to Vibe Studio. I'm not trying to hype him up.
You gotta
bro.
You'll see.
He didn't even know I was putting this in the podcast.
I had no idea.
This is the dopest thing I've ever done in my life, and I'm saying yo, I would go there every day if I could, but I'm grateful for you, man. And, just want to ask you, any last words you want to leave with people that are tuned in?
I think the last thing that I'm going to say, and probably the most impactful, is if you don't take anything from this podcast, the one thing I want you to take from it is who's on the front of my shirt and what it says, that Jesus is the reason. And he's always been the reason. He's always been looking out for you. Your Father in heaven is waiting for you to come to him. So if you don't do anything else, give God a chance.
Boom. Man, that is a bar. That's it. So, all right, guys. I know that today's podcast was a lot. And a lot of inspiration, a lot of God moments. Again, I want to encourage you guys to pay attention to what CJ said. If you listen to this taking notes, reset it, listen to it without taking notes, and then take notes again. It's just a really great way to dissect information. And if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button, like it, comment, share it. Only do that if this podcast touched you. If you're like, man, Joe, this is a waste of time, I'm sorry. But if it wasn't, like, comment, share, subscribe, because we're going to be doing more. We're going to be having more conversations like this. And Trailblazers Talk will be one of the top podcasts in the world by the end of 2024. So thank you, CJ. I appreciate you, man.
This is awesome.
God bless, guys.